Good to see you, man.
Good to see you too. I'm shocked this is actually happening.
I know. It's not that it's so hard to do, but between you and me, you and I have had this funny relationship, which I enjoy thoroughly.
Well, thank you.
It's very honest. It's very straightforward.
By the way, have you ever had somebody bugging you for so long about
like you?
Yeah.
No. Again, I appreciate it. It was either I was going to get mad. So you say, oh, restraining order. It's like, no, I would just do it myself. I have friends, but there's something about I'm no bull, man. There's something about you. I mean, look at you. You're like howdy doody. It's like it's hilarious.
I don't know if
there's nothing threatening about you, which I love, and then yet you got mad, and you were persistent. So you have balls. And I appreciate your balls. I don't want to see them, but I appreciate your balls.
It's just be difficult.
This is going to be the most uncomfortable interview you've ever had.
You think so?
I do, because I think it'll be my first YouTube video that's about somebody who interviews people. And won't leave them alone.
I was talking to your wife, Kathryn, yesterday, and she was telling me how you guys are in Santa Barbara. I'm like,
yeah.
And it was clear you were coming down for this. I'm like, I feel so bad. We would have gladly come up there. She's like, oh no, he was looking for an excuse to get away for a day.
No, that's not true. I'm not that guy. I wasn't looking for. I'm happy about it right now because things are funny. Kids are tough, man. I've had kids my whole life, my whole adult life, and we're dealing with some hormonal stuff for sure. They're looking for boundaries, and for me, I'm just like, my kids have balls. They're girls, but they have balls, and they have. I said the other day, I was like, is there nothing about me that's intimidating to you? You know what I mean? It was like it's a free form to me. They're not scared, which I appreciate very much.
How's everybody adjusting to Santa Barbara?
They love it. They really love it. Yeah, I think I've had I don't get stressed very often. I'm not one that's prone to stress and letting himself spin out, but...
And you've always been that way, or that's more recent?
No, I think it's more recent, My dad, it's funny because you talked to my dad. Did you talk to my dad?
Oh, we talked last night. He was awesome.
I'm so curious.
And one story after the next about your upbringing.
So he called me, sent a text, because if you put pressure on my dad, he'll stress. And he texted me, and it was a stress text. And it was like, this guy's calling me, what's happening? I don't know, do I, And I said, well, did you call Erica, my assistant? And he said, I did twice, but she didn't call me back. And then I called my assistant and I said, hey, why didn't you call my dad back? And she said, I did call him back. I gave him Graham's email. He said he was cool with it. So there's this whole conversation that had happened. So I think that's a basis that I go, we don't want to do that. We don't want to stress out. We don't want to make it about, the stress so much. But the point is because of my history in Santa Barbara, us making this very quick move where somebody offered, money for our house in Malibu and then making the move to Santa Barbara. And I had done SNL and I had done the World Dune 2 tour. I was running on fumes. I let myself get super stressed. So for the first time, I had it once before, for the first time in 16 years, I contracted Bell's palsy again. And I was looking in the mirror and I was cleaning my face and I saw this side of my face slowly start to droop.
Really?
And I was like, holy. The last time it happened.
Around W
was another time that I was contemplating moving to Santa Barbara. It's an undeniable connection. So there's something stuck in a folder in my head that represents the worst of the worst. And yet, now that we've been there, it's been amazing.
The book.
Yeah.
First, take me to Jordan as you're writing the thing.
I mean, look, my wife gave me this great writer's hut that she had built, and it was 60 square feet. And I painted it myself with one brush. this kind of Irish green, something that reminded me of Ireland. And out the windows, I have this wildflowers and all this kind of stuff. And
because Ireland over the years has been,
it's just had a massive impact
yeah.
on me. You know, maybe a literary impact or whatever it is, romanticizing the shit out of it, and that's all okay with me as long as it has the impact that it's had. And so, you know. The idea of writing a book, not that it's not my first book, but anything that I've ever written has kind of ended up in a dark corner. So it was the first book that was intended to try to be published. And I always imagined myself writing it there, especially after she had given me that wonderful gift. But did I? No, of course not. I'd written a few things there, but then I was traveling, I was going to Jordan, I was in Abu Dhabi, I was in Budapest, I was all over the place, Italy, and which has its own romance, but just not something that I could have ever projected would inspire me. So I'm sitting at this hotel in Jordan, and they had left because my family's always with me when I'm working. They had left, and I was like, this is the time that I have to write. I probably wrote 60,000 words in that 2 weeks, maybe 50 or 60. You know, it was a lot. A lot. Just get up in the morning. If I wasn't working, walking around in the dunes or whatever, Wadi Rum, I would just sit there and it was just all pouring out.
And I think as you cut it down from like 95,000 words or whatever it was to what you're ultimately publishing, you were editing at like 2 a.m. and like what was the cut down process? Like
I have kids, so I couldn't, and we're present with our kids. And it's a pain in the ass, but it's just a choice.
You've always chosen, with maybe one exception, to go without nannies.
Yeah, man, just because it feels weird. It's like, I have a big thing about looking back. What do I want to look back and see? Like, because I've been able to look back. I've been in the situation where I look back and I cringe. Or I look back and I go, I'm lucky to be out of that situation, or I'm lucky to have a different perception. So I have this thing about, like, ultimately a deathbed. Like if I could illustrate my perfect life, I would die peacefully on a deathbed, but I'd be awake and I'd be consciously awake for that last moment. And I just want to chuckle. That's it. I've always seen it. I've seen it since I was a kid. I'm like, if I leave in that way, I want to be able to look back at this entire trajectory that I've lived and go, that's fun. That's interesting.
What do you mean you've seen that since you were a kid?
I've seen it since I was a kid. I'm like, in projecting what my life is going to be like, whatever fantasy I had. And it's not specific. I'm just like, whatever choices, whatever opportunities come up, make choices within those opportunities that I can look back and chuckle. I think that's as clear as I can be.
By the way, I loved the stories in the book, including...
You're one of the few people that have read the book, by the way.
How about, though, one of the most outrageous stories that you decided to exclude?
I didn't take anything out of the book worried about what might be perceived of me or legal reasons.
And I loved how
I was approached legally by a couple of things.
Were you?
I was. Just people I mentioned and all that. And I tried to make the book not sensationalizing certain people, like, oh, I knew this person. Like, hey, I had a life. I really wanted to be an actor. Everybody knew it when I was 4 years old. And then I had a tough time for a little while. And then I became an actor. And then I met famous people. And I love my life. That's not what the book is.
Right.
The book is trying not to sensationalize people and say, look, this is human messiness, and this is my version of it. And I happened to meet some people along the way.
I liked how you opened the book, too.
How?
Well, the masturbation.
Oh, yeah. They talked about taking that out.
Oh, really? Okay.
They talked about rewriting it in a way that wasn't as crude.
I don't know if this is going to upset you. Your dad asked last night for one something.
From the book? Really?
And I'm
what
like,
did you?
well, it's like appropriate or inappropriate? He's like, oh, I don't care. So I shared the
Did you?
masturbation.
Good.
And he's like laughing hysterically. He's like, that's my Josh.
That's it. There was a moment where he went on The View, and I don't know what he was promoting, but he went on The View, and I had just posted a picture of myself naked. And I don't know why. I still don't know why. But anyway, I posted a picture of myself, and he goes on The View, and it's so respectful, and it's so classy. And then suddenly this massive picture behind him comes on the screen, and it's of me naked. And they go, "What do you feel about this?" And he didn't know about it. So he had nothing, there was nothing to like pre-prepped him. And he looked behind him, and he resorted to, I think, the most cliched thing he's ever said. He goes, "You know, kids." And I was like, that's all you had to say? You know, kids. You know how they are, you know.
So you called people reading this memoir the most stressful, confusing time imaginable. Why?
It's me, man. It's me. You know, I have this thing. Again, we were talking about it earlier. It's like this self-masochistic part of me that just kind of goes, what if I did that? What if I just went further? I don't know if that was like punk rock in my adolescence or what, but what if I'm just raw with this whole thing? What if I just am honest? What if I'm as confused as I've been and we all get in moments? And what if I allow that to manifest in the writing or whatever? So I don't have anybody else to blame it on. This was written by me, which I found out later. They're like, you know what's a major plus for us is that you wrote this. And I was like, what does that mean? And they were like, most people don't write their own memoirs. I go, what? I had no idea. Ghostwriters and this and that. Tell your story and have somebody else write it. I can't imagine. It's my vernacular, you know? So in doing that, like when I did the audio recently, I can speak the English language fairly well. I'm good in front of a crowd, and I've learned that, you know, because I was a decent writer. I had people like the Coens asking me to read speeches or write speeches, and that kind of grew and grew and grew. So I'm fairly comfortable with doing that. And then I do the audible, which people have told me through and through is pretty difficult. And I was like, I don't think this one's going to be difficult for me. Literally hell.
Why?
Bro, I don't know. It was like, it was either my brain got tired, or I wasn't sleeping enough, or whatever it was, but I tripped through that, you know, there were times, there were days, there were hours in that days where the English language was so elusive to me that I was like, I don't know what happened. So during that process, I was literally wishing that it didn't exist. I was saying, I wish I'd never written this book. I should have never done this. Why am I doing this? I'm going to be found out now. I'm a total fraud. You know, what is this whole idea like being a writer, and why is that so important to me, and why has it been so important to me, and why can't I just read and be happy? I got to write anything.
You said once about yourself, when you were growing up, you were positive something in you was broken.
Yeah.
Explain that.
You know, when you try and be, you know, there's an expectation, I think, that parents or otherwise teachers put on you, and it's having to live to a certain standard. Are you a kid that's going to be successful? Are you a kid that's going to be this? And everything that I manifested was against that. Now, whether it was on purpose or not, who knows? Or whether I was just innately dim, let's say. And then you have a teacher like Mr. Visser in Santa Barbara High, 9th grade, that came up and said, grammatically, I don't know what the you're doing, but you're a good writer, just keep writing. And it's that idea of you're paying attention enough to actually see something in somebody that they may not even see in themselves. And I'll give you a good example. Later in life, which I get, you know, it's like it emotionally impacts me. And that's, I didn't want to use my acting agent as my literary agent. I found that just, you know, I don't want to be surrounded by yes people, you know what I mean? And I've been lucky enough to find people in my life that tell me the truth, which I appreciate. I might not like all the time, but I appreciate it. Mm-hmm. So I went out and I kind of wrote, I went in the desert and wrote 40 or 50 pages that were really and I gave them to my agent, my acting agent, and the literary part of CAA. And then I went out and I started giving it to other people. And there's this girl, Kimberly Witherspoon, whose first client was Anthony Bourdain when she was 20 years ago or whatever. And she runs Inkwell Management. And she was like, I like what you do. You can do better, but I like what you do, which I appreciated. She said, I'll take you on. And she took me on, and I wrote, and then bang, she'd read a couple of versions, and I did something during the process where I did a part 1, a part 2, and a part 3. Part 3 was just a letter to my children. It doesn't exist like that now, it's different. So part 1 was what it was, and then I started part 2, and part 1 was very real and very raw. I started part 2, and I had a thing in my head. All these stories in part 1 are so severe, and they're like traumatic, and they're melancholic or whatever. Like, you need something, you need to McConaughey-ize your book. You need something that people can go, yes, life. You know what I mean? So I had that in the back of my head. I didn't tell anybody. So I'm sure I started to write with that in mind, saying, but life is good, but it's amazing, but it's okay, whatever. So I finished it. Maybe it was 80,000 words at this point. I gave it to Kim. Kim called me and she said, part 1 is the best writing you've done yet. It's great, flows really well, very well written, da-da-da. What happened with part 2? She said, what the F happened with part 2? And I fell in love with her, is what I did. I was like, wow. I go, first of all, how does she know? I've told nobody. And I told her my reasoning. And she was like, yeah, go back and rewrite the whole thing. I was like, wow. People paying attention, me paying attention, means it's the biggest thing for me. People who listen but don't really listen, that irks me. What's the point? What's the point in the conversation if you're not going to listen?
Or people that tell you what they think you want to hear versus what you need to hear.
No thanks.
You said happiness that lasts too long in people always scares you. Why?
That's a quote in the book. Happiness is not a goal to me. Solace is a goal. Contentment is a goal. Happiness is not a goal. There's a lot of, I'm thinking of somebody in particular, but the perpetual smile, which I think I also mentioned, it's always scared me a little bit. It's like serial killer smile. You know what I mean?
Which
it's
I
you're
do
not.
Quite a bit.
No, but you smile, but you have a reason behind it, you know? You have a reason behind it. There's something about this idea, which is the whole kind of point of the book, is to destroy this concept that we've leaned on, especially contemporarily, of celebrityism. And you go, the perception of celebrity is walking down a perpetual red carpet waving. That's what you spend your life doing. But for real? No, of course not. So what's for real? How messy is it? How stressful is it? Why is it stressful? Do we put ourselves in that because we find the value in that, or do we find the value in the work? Or does it lend to a better life? Or all that's been interesting to me, I think, because I grew up sort of in it. My dad was an actor. I watched him. I watched, him go from literally unknown to famous. Marcus Welby, the friends of its era. And the discomfort that came with that, or the stress that came with that. So it's always, there's been something in the back of my head where I'm like, huh. And I'm sure that's why my friends who I grew up with would tell you, like, when I became an actor, everybody went, what? When did that happen?
Your dad said he recalls, I think he was a junior in high school, he was deciding what elective to take, and one was like woodworking, another was something with copper, and then there was the acting one.
Yeah, there was like underwater basket weaving or acting. And I took the acting one. We were in the theater in Santa Barbara High School. And there were maybe 15 people in the class, 20 people in the class. And she said, we're going to do something called improvise. No idea, never heard of it. And she said, okay, so get up, create a character, any character you want, do the voice, and we're going to ask you as a house, we're going to ask you questions and you answer in that as that character. And she said, Josh, and it was the first one. I had no idea. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I was terrified of getting up on stage. It's a terror that's carried itself into now. Still a massive, massive fear that revolves around presenting myself.
Really?
Massive. Like debilitating for many, 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 many years. Not now. I've figured out ways to deal with it. But
and can I ask, what are the ways you've figured out how to deal with that now?
well, I don't drink anymore, so that let it come out in ways that were psychotic. But relaxing, embracing, prep, visualizing, right-sizing people. Oh, they're going to judge me because they know and I don't know.
On that front, by the way, you said, going back to your early acting days, I was paralyzed with what I thought other people saw in me.
Yeah.
Nothing, an invisible, worthless of a word.
Wow.
Describe that insecurity.
I mean, I remember doing an episode of Highway to Heaven with Michael Landon, right? I read for that. And it was after I did the Goonies, it was after I did Thrash, and I went into a room, I read, it was before I went to Europe. I took off to Europe by myself. And that gave me the money to do it. And I went in and I read for him, and Paul Walker ended up playing, it was a 2-part episode, he ended up playing my younger brother. And I remember doing scenes during that, and my legs were shaking so bad that all the focus was not on what was happening in the scene. All the focus was how to get my legs to stop shaking. If I can make them so tight that they'll stop shaking. You know what I mean? So there's been some through line to that where I've gotten up and gotten nervous and my trachea closes up. And suddenly there's a different voice coming out. And now everybody knows. And then if I'm conscious that everybody knows, then it only compounds.
Right.
You know how it is.
Well, so I want to take you to a moment after Europe. You're in Rochester, New York, with your longtime best friend, Anthony. It's opening night of your first play, Forgiving Typhoid Mary. Take me to the moment you forgot everything and take it from there.
Every actor has a nightmare. They have several nightmares. It's the worst things that can happen to you. All of them have happened to me. They don't happen to actors. They're nightmares for a reason. They're a projection of like, oh my God, if that were to happen, and then you do everything to assure that that won't happen. All those have happened.
And those are what?
Those are, I'm going to go up on stage, everybody's going to know I'm a fraud, whatever it is, So first professional play, I had already done previews for another play with Joe Montello directing, which was a great thing. Didn't have a ton of lines, so it was all right. Here I had big monologues. I'm playing this Irish priest. I had these big fat monologues that set up the whole play. So now it's opening night, they've given 3 or 5 or 6 writers their $5,000, we picked your play. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a 45-minute thing. Now we're going to, present our favorite play to you, Forgiving Typhoid Mary. And then lights go down, and then the pin light comes up, and here comes Josh, speaking in the worst, I'm sure, Irish accent, Mary Fitzgerald from party, and I'm doing this thing, and I look down, I take off my glasses, I do some cliche thing where I take my cassock and I clean my glasses, and I look up, and it's gone. I mean, it's gone. And now I would be able to improvise through it. I'd be like, it doesn't have the meaning and the weight to me that it did then, because it's my first professional play. I'm young. Anthony is the one who said, don't try to go do a movie between the series that we're doing together. Come and, develop yourself as an actor. Be a character actor. Don't be one of those people. Okay.
Anthony did say you were trying to improvise through it. He just said you were saying
I was
gobbledygook,
man. I was saying whatever I was saying, and I just saw the arrow continuing to go away from me, get smaller and smaller and smaller with all the dialogue that I needed. And I said something, and I know Anthony, he says this today, he reached over to his partner, his assistant at the time, and said, we have a playwright on our hands. Because I don't know what I was saying. It was probably But then I left. I didn't know what else to say.
Just walk off stage.
I just walked off stage, and they had gone totally manual, and I walked off stage, and the light stayed on, and then finally the light disappeared. And I went backstage, and both stagehands had their head in their hands. That's not what you want to see when you walk off stage. And I said, I'm out of here. Like, I was ready to walk out the exit door. I remember seeing the exit right there. I can see it right now. And Anthony luckily got out of his seat and came back around and said, nobody knows.
And he's like, he said he was like shaking.
He was shaking because I was out of there, dude. I'm a punk rock dude, Cito Rats. It's like all that came back. And I was like, I'm gone. I know what we were trying to do. It didn't work. Bye. And he was like, nobody knows. Nobody knows. And I said, that's bull. Everybody knows. I saw their heads cock. I saw it.
He got you to go.
He did. He got me to go out, and then I did another monologue, which went fine. And then I did some scenes, and then I did a third monologue where I went out on the other side of the stage, and I came out and I said the last line first. So it happened again, but I was able to edit in my head and explain what I had just said, which was, anyway, man. I don't know if I do that to myself, or if I did that to myself then, or if that was just an inability, or I don't know. I don't know. It's just the way it went.
Tell me about going to agencies with a acting resume that you completely made up.
I got kicked out of my house in Santa Barbara.
And what do you mean kicked out?
I was kicked out. My mom said leave.
Why?
Because I don't blame her. I mean, I said some things. She had been out the night before, and I said some things to her that were inappropriate, and she said, get out. So I got in my car, I went to the bottle shop, which was our place. We hung out. I spent my childhood in the parking lot of the bottle shop. Went to the bottle shop, my girlfriend was there, and I said goodbye to her. And then while I was saying goodbye, my mom ended up, the bottle shop's in the middle, there's a parking lot that we spent most of our childhood in, there was a parking lot over here. My mom showed up in that parking lot to come in and get a bottle, which somebody told me when I was in that parking lot. And so I said goodbye. I cried on my way down to LA. My dad was living in an apartment with the girl he was seeing that became his wife later. So I stayed on that couch for a couple months, and I just tried to turn things around. It was just Cito Rats, and things were kind of going downhill. So I hadn't gone to high school. I think I'd missed 38 out of 58 days of school. So I stopped going. And then I got down there and I was like, okay. And I started martial arts again. And my dad's like, why don't you try your hand at this acting thing if you liked it, what you did, the whole improvisation thing and that story. So I was like, yeah, I was just doing anything to try and get kind of a leg up. And so I had created a whole resume, There's a theater in Santa Barbara called the Librero Theater that I remember driving by. I never went in, but I drove by and I remember seeing Librero. So I'd say like, As You Like It. I did As You Like It at the International Librero Theater in Rome. I don't know, I just wrote a bunch of stuff. It was 100% false. And then they would ask me, because I read the plays, and they would ask me, like, how was playing, Stanley in Streetcar? Really good. Super good. Like, really amazing experience that I had, a lot. It was in a town that, doesn't exist. But, I would go into these kind of improvisational riffs. I was good at bullshit then.
And it didn't work with most agencies, but
all
it eventually
agencies.
Didn't somebody
yeah,
say
but Hillary Shore from Leading Artists, I'm sure saw right through it, but liked me for whatever reason. And then took me on, and I had to ask for money from her to get out of the parking lot because it was in Beverly Hills. It was like a $20 whatever, and I didn't have the $20. And I was always, they were like, oh, didn't you have a dad who had money and all that? But I was always very weary of money.
Your dad said last night, he's like, Josh has never asked me for
Ever.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like being on the hook like that, And I've mellowed out, I've softened. I let somebody send me something free once in a while, and I say thank you, and I let it be at that. But I have something about being on the hook, say, I'm going to give you ask for $5 and somebody offers you 20. I just feel like there's some manipulative something going on there. I want to earn my buck, know that I've earned my buck.
So you said there was never a plan. Maybe that was the problem. I never devised a plan for work, for life, or to be the best at anything. I was a wanderer. The pros and cons of that in your mind are what?
I think it allowed me to experience a childhood and a life that was interesting, given the times. I didn't have that thing, maybe I went against it or whatever, of like, what do you aspire to be? It just wasn't even, it wasn't in the consciousness. It just wasn't, none of us were gonna make it. You know, and it sounds so morbid and all that, but most of those guys didn't make it. Most of those guys died. There was something about the way that we were living in the extremes that we were living in that didn't suggest future. And it wasn't the typical affectation of like, live fast, die young, have a beautiful corpse and all this. I'm gonna die before I'm 30. It's like, no, you're not. Come on. But these guys, it's different. It was different. It was a different, it was a rebellion with no ceiling. It was just reaction.
And you've actually kept a list of how many of that group has passed away.
You mean how many? Yeah. I mean, there's other people in that list, and there's people like Cornell and that I put on that list that doesn't belong on that list. It's just friends that have passed, which is a very different thing. But of that group, and then there's those people that are still alive that like say, hey man, tell Brolin we're not all gone. You know what I mean? Which I get once in a while. And there's still people that are out there and thriving and doing what they do and just doing what they do. But yeah.
But I want to ask you more about that a little later. But on the professional front, Oliver Stone had once said you could be a leading man, but that he didn't think you really wanted that. And then your dad had told me last night his recommendation to you was always to be a character actor, and that you heard that kind of resonated. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I know he says that. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if that's true because I don't think that you can say, I want to be a character actor. At least I don't ever remember saying to myself, I want to be a character actor. I just want to be an actor. I knew what it was like for 22 years, even though I had, you know, an incredible beginning. I was lucky enough after 300 auditions or whatever to get the Goonies. It just happened, you know? So for whatever reasons that happened, and then you experience this incredible thing that's now become even more incredible. But afterwards, it wasn't that, you know? I'm sure I got thrashing based on the Goonies. And then after that, it just kind of went downhill. And I spent 22 years just trying to work. I'd do anything. I don't care what it was.
And having experienced that Goonies high probably made the lull that followed
harder, just more weight, because you're coming from someplace, you know what I mean? It's like these guys that we've seen kind of hit and then they go away, and 3 years later you're like, what happened to them? Like they did that movie, it didn't perform, whatever. So I had that, but it wasn't all on me. And then suddenly I have this 22-year lull where I'm working, but you know, say I do a series and my face is plastered on Times Square and it's plastered on Sunset Boulevard, and 8 episodes later we realize it's not gonna hit, and those posters get ripped down, and you know, you have that enough times and you're like the guy who's not gonna hit. You know, it's just, you're not that guy.
Yet all the while, director Paul Haggis called you still a picky son of a because even when you have no money and you're, you know, asking anybody for parts, you still would turn down big commercial roles.
Why? Even when after I did No Country, I got offered a role. I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but I got offered a role, and I got offered a couple of suitcases full of money. I mean, money that I couldn't even imagine in my lifetime. And it was with a good actor too. It was with a really good actor. And I left that meeting, and I called my agent and I said, absolutely no way. And he called the studio at that same moment, Jeff Robinoff, who I had a relationship with after that. And he said, I think I got him. We definitely got him. Like, nailed it. And it couldn't have been further from the case. You know what I mean? But there's a story that along those lines, when I was 18 years old, I auditioned and got the Annette Funicello, Frankie Avalon comeback movie called Back to the Beach. My agent called me and he said, you got it. And it's a surfer and you get it because you surf, you know. And it was a dumb role. And there was also at that time a series from the people who did Hill Street Blues, St. Elsewhere, and Miami Vice that had all kind of banded together. And they were going to do this series about the 50s called Private Eye. And there was a sidekick, kind of an Elvis-obsessed sidekick. And anyway, I went back and forth, and I was like, I really want to go for this other part, and if I really want to go for this other part, I can't do the Back to the Beach. So I turned down Back to the Beach. And I had 5 agents call me at different times. And I had one call me an idiot, which I remember very clearly. He's like, you're an idiot. That's why you pay us, to make decisions like this for you. And I was like, yeah, I know that, but I just don't want to do this. I want to go for that. Anyway, I ended up getting that, which was never going to happen, and how it happened, I still don't know. That series didn't work. It lasted 8 or 10 episodes. And then NBC offered me a fee to pay me a certain amount of money to stay with NBC because they liked what I did. And I said no. I don't know, man. It wasn't just about having the power of saying no, but it was like, I don't want to be stuck. I trust life enough.
And even today, you've turned down plenty of big stuff. I mean,
on the way down here.
Oh, really? What did you turn down on the way down?
I'm not going to tell you what I turned down.
So you turned down the Jurassic World role that ultimately went to Chris Pratt. What did James Cameron say when you turned him down for Avatar?
I think I heard he was angry. I don't mean to make people angry. Well, I understand it, because when you have something in your mind and you have a status and a power that you're used to people feeling really grateful that you're offering it to them. I don't know if that's the case with him, because I don't know him well enough, but it was based on the thing. It wasn't based on him. And yet, because it involves I don't know. I saw a teaser thing that I thought was amazing. I saw it with my kid. But something like Dune, I wasn't trying to get Dune. I went in to pitch a different idea, and then I ended up, the Mary Parent looked at me and was like, what about Josh for Dune? I didn't even need to read that, because it's Denis, and I love Denis, so I had a relationship with Denis, and it was like, I don't care what the role is, I'll do anything with you.
Why not play George Jones?
There's a couple of reasons. I think there was some fear in that. I think, honestly, there was a little bit of fear.
But you said yourself, that is when you historically lean in.
No, I know. And there's only 2 roles that I've ever done that with, and I had good reason to do it. Like, there was one role that I pulled out of that even to this day I go, maybe I should have done that. But I went to Thailand to go see my son, and who was living there at the time, and so I had a good reason. But it wasn't just fear, it was other things. It was being done because I had developed the whole thing. I brought Jessica into it years ago. But it was being done in a way that I didn't like. And it came and went, and it was appreciated, but it wasn't appreciated in a way that I thought it could have been in different hands.
What about the Hunchback of Notre Dame?
That's something, okay, so my dad would play that every year. I think he had an obsession with Hunchback. That's the one carryover. So I was in a position where I had the opportunity to do it, and we were doing it. I remember Johnny Depp was going to be the poet, and I'd met with Tim Burton in Cannes and was on Johnny's boat talking with Tim, and he was really into it. And, you have these moments, man. You have these fluctuations, and I look back and I have been like, on Tim Burton at that time, on Johnny's boat, Right. It was like, had a Picasso there and, red velvet. on the couches, and I was just like, what the and we were all in. And then the studio had a problem with, I even offered it to the Coens at one point.
I want to ask you about money because, and I know just the other day you turned down a big part two, or maybe that's the one you were referring to as you were...
Green Lantern?
I don't know.
Me neither, I don't know the name, I'm just randomly saying things.
You said you were always the one that was paid the least for the longest time.
Oh yeah, man. I was always the one that was paid the least, and I was always the one that would pick up for people who didn't want to do publicity. I don't know why. It was probably really good for me in the end because I learned how to be more comfortable with it or not give a shit as much. But yeah, I was always paid the least. Always. Always. Because why would you pay me? You know what I mean? It's Josh. You know?
And you felt like that's...
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
mentality?
That's not my perception of myself as being less than. It just there was no viable reason to pay me.
Yeah.
I wasn't bringing in. I mean, you pay somebody because you feel that your investment is going to be met by the people that your name brings in. I wasn't bringing anybody in, man.
Of American Gangster, take me to the moment where your agent tells you how much you're going to make.
I mean, it's a success. American Gangster is perceived as a success, but if you look at the numbers now, like, was it that much of a success? Like, it made more a little domestically than what it costs. And so I would never perceive, even if I was following the numbers, that it would have any impact on me, no matter how successful it was. So I got home. I had done Paul Haggis's. I had done a little part in Paul Haggis's. So it was No Country, American Gangster, and the Paul Haggis scene. And I was broke, man. Like, I had paid back debts that I had, and I hadn't made a lot of money, and whatever money I did make went back into family stuff.
Which for No Country, after, you got $100,000, but after taxes and agents' fees, it was 30, yeah.
30 grand or something, and my mom had died, and I had that ranch, and and so I was keeping up costs of that, and so yeah, I got a call, and she's my lawyer, who I talked to this morning, and she was like, "Guess what? Like, you got some back end for American Gangster," and I was like, "What?" And I was in panic at that point. I was like, I don't know. Like, there's no jobs coming in. No Country hasn't come out. American Gangster hasn't come out. Nothing's come out. People still imagine this, He should have hit, but he didn't. And then she sent me the number. It was like 60 grand. 60 grand. Out of that, I was going to pull off, again, probably 30, maybe 25. And I can live off that. That's amazing. And I called her and I was like, I can't believe this. Like, 60 grand, that's amazing. And she said, look at it again. And I had missed a zero. I still don't know to this day. I based everything off that. And they're like, no, it didn't make any money. I'm like, it made $600 and something million, Men in Black. I'm like, where's my money? But no, nothing had ever paid off like that. And I started bawling. I started crying. I just felt like it just made no sense to me. It was winning the lottery. That was it. I was good for good. I could never act again and live for the rest of my life on 600 grand. I could make 600 grand at that point in my life last 5 lifetimes, at least in my head.
Tell about market probability.
Market probability was something that I developed with a friend of mine, Brett Markinson, who's a brilliant trader, and I learned a lot from him. And when I started trading, I used this thing, TradeStation, and I had 3 screens up, and I had 4 tabs per screen, and I learned how to read graphs and all this kind of stuff. And
you're day trading?
Day trading. Day trading. And I asked a lot of questions. I wasn't embarrassed, and I wasn't ashamed to ask the same question over and over and over. So I learned a lot. I learned how to be disciplined. I learned that it's not an emotional game. I learned that it's not an instinctual game, that you go, I have a feeling this is going to happen. It interested me because, like juicing or whatever, it's the challenge never stops, like photography. There's no way to master photography, like acting. There is no way to master acting. You can find your niche. You can challenge yourself within that niche. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But with day trading, it was every day, man. I was up at 4:30 every morning, and I ended up making more money than I had ever made acting.
And this was kind of during a break. You were
This was
taking
before
from
No
it.
Country.
Okay.
I had gone to Prescott, Arizona, and I worked for a guy, Tim, and became close with him and his family, and he had a landscaping business. And when I got out of that house, I lived in a house for 7 months with 27 other guys. And it was, it was a clean up your act house.
What do you mean?
I gotten sober.
Uh-huh.
I gotten sober, and I had gone to a place that said that I, more than anybody they had met, needed extended care. I'm sure that was their go-to, but they said I needed extended care. So I ended up going to Prescott, Arizona, which is now kind of a hub for that kind of thing. But there was only one male place that existed. There was one female place, and it was called the Prescott House. And I lived in the Prescott House with a bunch of guys trying to get their act together for a while.
And what did that entail?
Rats, a lot of rats. I had to get up and bicycle to a meeting at 5 o'clock every morning. I had to do 2 groups. I saw a lot of guys pass there. Saw 5 guys when I was there pass. I know it now because I still know some of those guys. You know, they're just improvising. They're improvising and they're creating a business to make money and try to help people within that. And it had the impact that it had on me. I'm glad that I went through it.
I want to take you back to when you were a kid, growing up.
Okay.
Tell about the old metal golf cart.
About what I used to feed the horses in?
Yeah.
Well, there was a ranch cart. It was it was an old 70s ranch cart. And it had a big metal bed. And then you could put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, probably 16 bales of hay in it. And I used to feed the horses every morning. That was my job.
A lot of horses, though, right?
65 were the most we ever had.
And explain the cages that you used to clean.
Oh, the cages were filled with wolves. It depends. It was all because my mom was an animal activist who would find people, I've said this a million times, find people who would illegally take them out of the wild, re-release them, or find the most habitable zoo, like a lion country safari type thing. So we were driving everywhere. My mom didn't fly, so my mom drove 60,000 miles a year.
By choice?
By choice, because she didn't want to fly, because she used to be a flight attendant and something went wrong and she thought she was going to die and she said never again. So we drove everywhere. If we were going to Baton Rouge, we'd wake up at 2 in the morning and be in the car and go to Baton Rouge, and with an animal in the back, with like a wolf or a cougar. So I have pictures. Here, look at this.
And these weren't always tame animals either. Which
None of them were tame.
Right?
There was no tame animals. Right. There was 0 tame animals. But here, I'll show you really quick. Here, this is a picture of me in a crib with a mountain lion. Let's see, where is it?
And you guys had how many mountain lions?
It depends. Like there was Miss Kitty, there was Dingbat, there were a bunch of different mountain lions. I birthed a lot of mountain lions. There were several wolves. There were a lion at one point.
Jeez.
And for some reason, if you look through these, I mean, this is so, you would think my parents ate me, but they didn't. That's a cougar, baby cougar.
Wow. You would wake up some mornings with bite marks on your face.
Holes, not bite marks. Holes, bleeding holes. I mean, I dealt with it much better than my brother did.
Well, and he also had some, was, I guess, walking on the wooden scaffolding of one of the cages once.
Yeah, he had 60 stitches in his leg.
What happened?
He fell in. There was a wolf that had been let out of the cage and let run in the garden. There was just a, normal, typical old school 70s fencing that was crappy. And my mom let the wolf run around. My brother didn't know it. And at 6 years old, he got up on the edge of that fence and walked along the fence, and the wolf jumped up and grabbed his leg and pulled him down. And I was planting flowers with this ex-con named Norman that lived on the ranch, that was like a ranch hand. Norman had like thyroidal eyes. They would stick out, And we heard the screaming. And we looked up, I think I was 10 at the time. And Norman jumped the fence, and I went in. And Norman kicked that wolf away from my brother and pulled him in. And then my dad came home almost at the same time. Went in and confronted my mom. My dad wanted to shoot the wolf. My mom said, "I'll kill you if you shoot the wolf," and meant it. And so he went and got stitches and went to the hospital. It was like another day.
And the animal stayed.
Of course. The animal was the priority.
You remember when you were having dinner one night and your dad said you announced to the table you're having some of the best ribs that you've ever had?
Did he tell you the pig story? What a God, man. I don't know what my dad tells stories. I mean, it's kind of in the book. Like in the beginning of the book, there's a 1968, and he tells the story of me being born, right? Remember that story?
I'm not sure.
I won't go into the whole story, but basically, you know, I say in the book, in this chapter, that he describes me like a turd that he had a problem flushing. But he says it in this way with this smile on his face, and I'm trying to figure out, how is that a good story? So this story of me raising pigs, this is a horrible story, man. Me raising pigs, Oink and Snort. Those were their names. And I helped raise these pigs, and then we're eating dinner one night, and my dad, like, it's amazing to me that he would tell you that story. It makes him look so bad. He said, "Guess what you're eating?" I said, "What?" He said, "Either Oink or Snort." And I was like, "What?" And then he went, "Yeah, that's what we're eating. That's who we slaughtered." I was like, why would you tell a kid that? It makes no sense. Why would you tell your kid that with any semblance of like celebration? Or was he just looking to have an impact? I think he was looking to have an impact.
Why?
Psychologically, on camera in front of you, I mean, I could get into it. Like, really, like, when you feel like you don't have an impact, that's when you start to look for any impact, whether it's a negative impact or not. And I think I can break it down to it being that.
And why?
Because I can't imagine saying that to my kid. I can't. It doesn't even. It's nowhere in my universe to say that to a kid. Why would you?
Have you guys talked about that story?
Yeah, we've talked about it. But my dad's an interesting, not to reveal too much, but my dad's an interesting guy in that he's super friendly, but there's a stop sign. You know what I mean? It's like before you get on the freeway, the red light, you're like ready to go. You're ready to get on the freeway and go 65, 75 miles an hour, and the light never turns. So you're sitting there like this, and you're like, it's presented to me that I'm gonna go, and then the stoplight never changes. It just stays perpetually red.
How so?
In that, like, you wanna go further with this. Do you wanna be closer?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I find myself to be a fairly open book with my life, with my kids, whatever. And not regurgitating a bunch of that they don't need to hear, but I think fairly open and honest about my life.
And you think he isn't? Why?
I think there's something that he...
Like a generational thing?
It could be, but I know a lot of guys his age, Anthony Zerbe being one of them, that's not like that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And people that I've been lucky enough to be truly deeply affected by. Not that I'm not affected by him, because I'm affected by my dad, for sure. And in some great, grand, positive ways. But I think that there's one. I'll give you an example. My daughter gave me a book. God, what's it called? It's a book about getting to know my dad. And it's not because of lack of getting to know me, but it was a book that came in reaction to a story that she knew where I wrote my dad. I called my dad one day and I said, can you and I get together? Because my mom died, was pretty young, and there's some questions that I would have liked to have asked her that I didn't get to. And my mom was an open book, so I got to know a lot of stuff, but about her past and about her lineage and all that kind of stuff. And I had that moment, and I called my pop and I said, hey, can I come over and talk to you? It's about what? I said, about just you and like your likes and dislikes and your past and your family and all that. For what? I don't know, just because I want to get to, I want to get to know you better. There's specifics I would like, and I didn't want it to come across like, when you die, I want to have, the good. I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to suggest that he's going to die soon or at any time, And he goes, well, I don't understand. He started to get more stressed about it, and I was like, okay. And I backed up and I said, I tell you what if I put in a recorder and I'll write out a bunch of questions. And then you can just kind of randomly, like whatever comes in your head, if a question instigates something else other than what the question asked, just riff. Yeah, that sounds great. So I wrote 107 questions, wrote it right then. I still have the 107 questions. And I sent him a manila envelope with a recorder, with the battery in the recorder. I put the battery in the recorder and then brought it up maybe 6 months later. I said, are you putting stuff on that recorder? And he was like, yeah, where is that thing? And I went, and then I got it. That's not a place you want to go. That, for some reason, without taking it on as, oh, poor me, I'm taking it as there's something about the history of you that you don't want to visit. And that's okay. So I didn't take it personally. But in reaction to that story and knowing that story, 2 years later, 3 years later, my daughter for Christmas, I open a thing and it's getting to know my dad better. And I'm still filling it out, hand, I'm probably halfway through it now. So yeah, that's breaking the chain. That's a broken chain. I don't know how exactly, but that's a broken chain.
There was a period of time with the two of you where you were less close.
Yeah.
What do you think allowed you to reconnect?
Me, for sure. There's an expectation that I had in my head, and my dad says it, and he probably said it to you. He's like, I remember when Josh went to war. Like, he uses that term. And the term is based on me saying, I'm not just going to wade, or wade in the shallow version of this pool, of this profession that I've chosen. I'm going to go all in. I love the psychology of it. I love the behavioral aspects of it. I love all that, studying the behavior of what it is that we do and why we tick, what makes us tick. So I did, and I challenged myself in some major ways. I looked for the biggest challenges. I allowed for the opportunities to show up that I wanted, that I hoped would show up. And my dad says, I remember that. I remember when you did that. Why did we bring it up? I brought it up because what was your question?
Oh, I asked about, I said there was a period where you guys were less close.
Oh, I think that would be considered less thing, because I wasn't following his trajectory. I was definitely, meaning when you're the son of an actor, there's always, there's so many kids that whether it's Sean Penn or somebody else that lived under the idea of a shadow, which is more based on celebrity than work. Do you know what I mean? Which is, I'm sure, part of my reaction to it is, oh, you're Brolin's son, and you're trying to do the same thing.
Which some would think would make it easier.
Nepotistically, it would make the whole thing. And the truth of the matter is maybe it does open a door or two in the beginning, and if you don't prove yourself in a very real way, you're gone pretty soon. We've seen it again and again and again and again and again. Whether you're on the Golden Globes and your kid is presenting an award, it's like, I don't know why you would ever do that. That's my own opinion. Why would, like, that to me is gonna, if that kid has an interest in pursuing that profession, don't let it be based on celebrity.
There was an article that wrote this
that
I thought was interesting. It read,
I'm sure you did, Graham.
As Brolin talked about his dad, you get the feeling that he's either realized a truth or rationalized away enough to accept that James was there for him as much as he could be.
Both. Honestly, both. Honestly, both. It's hard for me, without sounding victimized, which I don't feel, which I think is part of the reason why you write a book. I threw myself into a labyrinth to want to know more about what that is. Not just based on that, a lot of different things. But like, where do you adjust yourself, which is ultimately the only thing you can do, because I can't worry about him changing, and go, why aren't we more compatible? What's the lack of compatibility? You know, am I more my mom's son? Do I just have that, do I have that bite that he may recoil from? And I think that could be something. And what I would do in reaction to that is bite more.
Why?
Because I am my mother's son. You know what I mean? It's challenge, go into the challenge.
Okay, but then at some point that changed. So what was
That's what I'm
involved
saying.
with like,
so then
getting to that point?
there's being able to look at myself and saying, look, man, I'm so grateful to this human being that I'm here. I wouldn't be here without him. Like, we can look at the crudeness of it. He laid on my mom and then I showed up. I'm glad. Wasn't the greatest marriage, but he got together with her and I get to be here. Would I rather not be here? No. I like it here. This is fun. This is a fucking crazy circus and I'm having a good time. So I'm grateful to him on that basis. You know what I mean? And so I look at him differently, and then you realize that he's not going to be here forever and all that. And then you just go, you know what? It's okay for me, even in the stress moment, about you. About who, what, like, do I talk to this guy? Do I not talk to this guy? Like, what? Who is he? Is he, you know, is he trying to get information of you? And what did you do? Whatever it is. And I go, no, he's cool. It's Graham. You know Graham. He's always been here. And he, you know, I could have reacted differently, and I didn't. I think I was like, hey, if you don't want to do this, it's okay. But he's a nice guy, and he's on the up and up. And
so when we
meaning
talking,
you
remember how many times you went to Juvenile
Hall?
Yeah.
I think twice. I remember going from Juvenile Hall on a bus to that courthouse on a chain gang. Not a southern chain gang, but I was on a chain with 10 or 12 other people with ankle cuffs on and handcuffs, being led to my courtroom and then taken off the chain, but walking in still with ankle cuffs and handcuffs and saying hello to Your Honor.
You remember what you were thinking back then?
Yeah, that I had manipulated the judge in such a way that he really thought that this was an anomaly, that I was in the position that I was in the first time I saw him, and that he was going to be fairly lenient.
And what happened?
And I walked into my court date ankle cuffed and handcuffed. I was just in the yard of the courthouse in Santa Barbara, which is one of the most beautiful courthouses.
I can imagine.
Like literally, I mean, it's incredible. And I walked inside with my kids. It was open on a weekend. I don't know why it was open, but you can go in there just because the architecture is so amazing, and this is kind of Mexican architecture. And that's like what happened at Butterfly Beach. I had a full circle moment. That was the Cito Rat speech. So, you know, I remember cars with no doors. I remember the surf racks on top. I remember being with all my friends. I remember fights on that beach. I remember, you know, surfing on that beach. Good memories now. And I'm on that beach with my two kids and my wife, and I'm like, I just had a moment where I was like, when did this happen? And it's not as extreme as I'm not supposed to be here and all that, and like program talk and all that, but it was like, this was never supposed to happen.
Why never supposed to happen?
Because you didn't think like that. You know, it was an encapsulated bubble. It was a time where this group of guys banded together and leaned on each other, you know, based on fairly neglectful parents that just kind of narcissistically did whatever they wanted to do.
And some were rich kids, some were poor kids.
It was a mixture.
Yeah.
It was an extreme mixture. And and we all just kind of banded together, but it was also the beginning of punk rock. So we were all kind of shaving our heads and doing mohawks and doing that kind of stuff, and that was the beginning of Rich Kids on LSD, and a road I literally just drove, that house is gone. It's replaced with a new house, but I stopped and I showed my wife, I go, this is where I took LSD for the first time when I was 13. This is where this happened. This is where I learned to skateboard. This is where I started. I mean, this was it. You know, even when my dad says, like, I didn't know that was going on. How? We weren't hiding it. We were full-blown Cito Rat, in your face, Butterfly Beach. Like, that's all when you went to Butterfly Beach, it's not like it was now. It looked like a homeless shelter. You know, you'd go down there and there'd be cars. It looked like the South Bronx in the 70s. You know, you go, is that a version of like hello, hello, hello kind of thing? I'm sure there was that, you know, collectively there was some of that. But at the same time, it was like nobody gives a shit, so we're just gonna, so neither do we.
That's what you felt like?
That's what I felt like.
Why?
Nobody gives a shit. Because it's like, what do you do when you give a shit? You know, you talk, you exchange. What are you going through? What's happening right now? What's happening in your school? What's happening with your friends? Who are you hanging out with? You know, as opposed to, you know, and there's something there's a freedom in looking back when kids were just allowed to be kids and it wasn't so locked down like it is now. There's a fear that comes with that. There's a fear that like you can't be out in life because it's too dangerous. There was something really wonderful about that then. But then there's also a fine line between, you know, parents just saying like, eh, you know, can't deal.
And what do you think, like looking back on that period now, what do you think it actually was on the part of your parents?
You know, it's hard for me to blame because I go, look, my mom was a narcissist, period. You know what I mean? She was all about her own character. And I remember right before she died, there was a moment where that broke and people started to take her seriously. She came up with a good idea for a series at one point, and her and Clint Eastwood were going to do this series together that's actually happening right now about chimps and people. And there's a series on right now, literally, how many years later? 30 years later. And that was an idea that she had, and it was a brilliant idea. And people started to take her seriously. And I remember her crying one day, because she had always been perceived as this freak of nature. She was always this, you know, character. Even every talk show that my dad ever went on ended up talking about my mom the whole time. You know what I mean? They're like, yeah, but what about Jane? What about Jane? What about Jane? You'd be like, oh, yeah, Jane. And so looking back on that, you go, yeah, you know, she was consumed in that. And my dad was consumed by his work and his celebrity and all that kind of stuff. That's why when I did the Goonies, I'm on one stage doing the Goonies. He's on another stage doing Hotel. And then there's a guy named Tim Burton doing this movie called Pee-wee's Big Top on the other stage. And that's how my dad ended up doing Pee-wee's Big Top, because I became friends with Paul Rubin. Then things started to come together because it was on a professional level.
Really?
Yeah. There was something that we shared, as opposed to a difference in personality, you know, and I'll play it up and all that kind of stuff, of me being my mother's son and my dad being somebody. I mean, my mother cultivated that relationship. My dad will tell you that. They were married in 12 days after they met. He was rebounding from a relationship he had just, that had just fallen apart. My mom was like, well? My dad was like, and she says, well, are we gonna do it or what? He's like, do what? She's like, are we gonna get married or what? He's like, I guess. And then 7 days later, they were walking down the aisle.
How do you think the divorce impacted you?
I don't, you know, my mom always talked about divorce through the years, and it was like, I think by the time they did it, it was like, the mentality was, yeah, do the thing that you've been talking about forever, just do it, you know. He was living in the bedroom next to mine downstairs, and she was upstairs. So it was like, it wasn't, but I do think that my mom, I think the way that it impacted me is that my mom thought, no matter what drama was going on, my mom was truly a loyalist. in her version of it.
But and correct me if I'm wrong, you wrote about this, but she'd been having an
dude.
affair
I knew you were
with
going to bring that up.
a trucker
with a guy who looked
resembled
exactly like my dad.
for like 8 years.
Yeah.
Did he know about it?
No.
Okay.
But he did not know about it.
What, I don't.
Do you understand? It's like,
Well,
don't
like-
ask, don't tell.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's like some people have, it's like, yeah, that happens. If you're going to be a rock star, you're going to f a groupie. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's a go-to. And it's like, nah, you're home now. You know what I mean? I think there was a semblance of that in the air. Not that I knew that then, I didn't, but I think back on it now and I go, yeah, that was probably the case. Like, just don't ask and then you don't have to deal with it.
And he feared her.
Well, everybody feared my mother.
Why?
For obvious reasons. I wish she was here. You'd be scared of her. You know what I mean? She was super funny, super fun. But if you think I'm affrontive, forget it. My mom she'd say anything, do anything, didn't matter to her. So zero filter.
Was there like domestic violence towards him?
No.
Okay, got it.
Toward him?
Yeah.
Verbally. Yeah, verbally. I remember, I don't think it's that funny, but I remember my dad watering the plants, poor guy, man, watering the plants, and she was just going, he wouldn't wake up until 11 o'clock for obvious reasons, just not wanting to deal. And my mom would just be going off, what lazy, just on and on and on. You're just like, f***ing hell, man. So,
And you still remember that?
Oh, dude, I hear it like it was yesterday.
And you were how old then?
All ages. There wasn't an age where it wasn't that. So, yeah, she was, what I was going to say was, I think that my mom always thought that it would stay the same. Regardless of whatever, spoken understanding or not. I think she always thought it would stay the same. And then it wasn't. And I think things changed after that. I think my mom changed after that. My parents battled. They lost everything. We all went to the lawyers. So they were both broke. I mean, absolutely broke. My dad was in an apartment, and my mom borrowed some money from somebody to build this piece of property that she was left in the divorce, and she built a very cheap house. And then when she died, I was given that bill because she had never paid a penny on it because she didn't have a penny. So yeah, they were bust.
Tell about the Iron Horse and you kind of being her wingman.
The Iron Horse is called it's called like the Iron Pig now or something. It was gone from the Iron Horse to AJ Spurs to the Iron, whatever it is now. And the Iron Horse was our go-to restaurant in Templeton, California. It was the best restaurant ever. There was Boozy's in Paso, which was the bar, and then there was the Iron Horse. The Iron Horse was just a bunch of cowboys and kickers and ranchers and people who we knew and people who would come through town, and that was my mom's watering hole.
When you're like a kid hanging out there.
Always. But all kids were in there.
Okay, got it.
I mean, that was the thing. It's like, that's back when parents would take their kids out of school for 2 or 3 weeks to farm. And there was never excuse me, where's Willie? It's like, it was just a given. So yeah, we were not all of us. It's not like the whole playground was in the bar, but yeah, it was a rough and tumble place. Boozy's was worse, but Iron Horse was a great place to congregate. It's where everybody did in our area, and yeah.
She later on ends up getting in a fatal car accident on your birthday. And you said for like the couple of years after that, you were lost and spinning. And there's something that you said that stuck with us, which is that you said, it all comes down to a look she once gave when she saw me in jail. Explain that.
The look, it's not connected. Her death is not connected with when I walked out of Juvie Hall for the first time and she was waiting for me in the lobby or the little room that they put her in that I was allowed to talk to her in. There was a look that she gave me, a smile that she gave me that told me that I was on the right road. Not the wrong road, the right road. And it was a road of somebody who she had, I think, cultivated at that point, of cowboy, fighting, drinking. It was like, yeah, this is my dude. And I think that I played into that for a very, very long time, even after her death. And I tried. There was a part of me that was always like, there's something else out there. There's not just the Cito Rats. There's not just being a drunk. There's not just being that. I always, I was the guy secretly listening to Journey on the side, reading poems in the bookstore. And so something interested me outside of that. And luckily, I had along the way people like Anthony Zerbe and all that who were like, hey, there is actually something. It's this. And you're like, wow, really? We're not just encapsulated in this mentality. We can actually grow and stretch, and there are other worlds, and, reading Ray Bradbury for the first time in the back of a cup by accident, being in the back of the Grand Wagoneer on some trip and reading Martian Chronicles and my brain exploding. It was like, wow, there's a whole other thing.
And were those kind of the most effective tools you found to get past the impact her death had on you?
The impact I think the impact of her death, which I still am wrapped up in. I write a lot about her, and this is something that I've tried to find my way through. It's like, if you're a character, if you're just an interesting personality, there's a positive that comes with that, and there's a negative that comes with that, in my world. And when I look at my mom is the extreme of that. Like, there's no person that I've met that's a bigger personality than my mom. So even the negative impact that she had, at least she had an impact. She was there, unapologetically herself. And that's interesting to me. And then there's people that want to have an impact and all that. So I look back on my life and all these travels through all the ups and downs of my profession and all the ups and downs of my personal life. And all the people that I've come across, and I've come across incredible people in my life. I've been very blessed in that way to meet some of the greats. But nobody compares to my mom. Nobody.
And you were talking about you being still wrapped up in it and writing about it. I mean, isn't that in the best way possible?
I wouldn't want it any different. It's not like, you haven't been on the psychiatrist's couch enough to be able to work through this.
Wanted to ask you about marriage, because something Kathryn said yesterday is very connected to what you were just talking about. But how about what you learned from the earlier marriages and what that kind of taught you about yourself?
Is that, it's funny, I think about this, I don't know, often I think about this, but I don't have the kind of vitriolic perception of the past, and I don't, maybe it's because of where I come from or what I saw or something like that. So when I think of I'm still very close with the mother of my older kids, and I think we both decided along the way, because we got together so young. I mean, I look at 19-year-olds now and I'm like, you're a baby. Like, how would you ever, but my dad and I had kids at the same time. So I think whatever nervousness he was feeling, and I, confronted him when I was 19, and I said, hey, I'm having a baby, and he was like, hey, me too. So that was it kind of neutralized the whole, like, you can't have a kid right now, you're not even an adult yourself, and riding a Harley Davidson and the whole thing, But I think ultimately, again, getting back on track.
Well, here's one for you.
Yeah.
You said, my whole life has been bullied by that fear that has always tried to kill me. It haunted me. Total commitment.
Total commitment in confronting that fear, in confronting that. I don't know why. It's like, maybe because I saw an example of contraction. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm afraid to do that, or I'm a guy who can't, whatever that is, whatever example I had of that. and people contracting to that fear. And I said, I want to do the opposite. And did my mother represent that? Not necessarily. You know, she just represented personality and all that. But I liked the idea of, you know, I was terrified of acting, so I got further into it. You know, I was terrified of, you know, some form of real intimacy. So I, you know, oh, I remember. So, you know, you're talking about wives, or, you know, seeing Deb, you know, or seeing Minnie, or seeing, I saw Minnie on the beach when Westlyn was maybe 4 months old. And she was by herself and she was walking with her sister. And I was so happy to see her. I think she was maybe hiding a little bit. But I was like, hey, you know what I mean? I was like, that's the girl I was with for that amount of time. Like,
you guys were engaged back in the day, right?
Back in the day, yeah, for a tiny while. But so I don't have that thing. I don't know why. I don't know why. She f***ed me over. That person this and that person did that, and I don't have that. I just, maybe because I accept the fact that things last as long as. I also know that with the perspective that I have now, the perception that I have now, that those probably could have lasted a lifetime had I been less stuck on a result. It should be this. We should be behaving this way. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Which I think comes with youth and comes with an inability to be malleable. I think I'm much more malleable now.
And why?
I don't know. People are freaky. And I just accept it now.
The relationship with Kathryn works. Why?
It works on so many different levels that I don't even know how to talk about it. But the acceptance of somebody, what they are. I've seen Kathryn go from, I mean, she's confronted so much from somebody who was hanging out with me, who knew people, who had a status and had perceived status and had success and all that kind of stuff, and feeling herself like, where do I fit in all this? And then seeing somebody very personally confront dreams that she's had and see them manifest. I have massive respect for that. Despite your own brain, whatever those voices are telling you, are you willing to, knowing that it could backfire on you, are you, Graham, willing to keep calling Josh, even though you don't know what's going to happen? Because the Josh seems a little on edge. He seems a little out of the norm. He has no cars to show you.
I recognize that from your first email you sent me about running naked down Santa Monica Boulevard.
There you go.
Like that. So I was talking to Kathryn, and she told me I had to ask you about this. She said
there we go.
She was postpartum, interesting time. For her. And she asked me to take you to a moment when you guys were living in Atlanta. She said you looked like a guy with no options. That maybe he wasn't expecting to have kids again at this age, and he's getting ready to leave on location for work and didn't have the answers. She said it was devastating to see, but in the sweetest way possible.
Because you're in it for broke. I have no interest in doing this again. I have no interest in I would do it, but I have no interest in it. I don't think the grass is greener on the other side. Maybe that's where I've gotten. And I go, no, this is my yard. This is great. I like this yard. You know what I mean? But being in Georgia, first of all, I don't want to play that much golf. I have no interest. Like, if you don't play perpetual golf in Georgia, you're already an outsider. And we moved there for obvious reasons. She's going to be by her family, and it'd be this. It's COVID. Everybody moved, whatever. And we had this idea that didn't really play out the way she had imagined. So I was stuck in that. And then I was dealing with a very real postpartum of, like, you're dealing with a different person. This is a responsibility now. Who am I? And I saw her go through all that. And I had been through all that. So when I think about her during that time, whether we were in Georgia, I think it was more severe in Santa Fe during COVID. You know.
How so?
It was just, you couldn't move, you couldn't be around, you couldn't, you know, you go out to the playground or the yard and nobody would be there. I mean, it was literally like The Road. It was like Cormac McCarthy's The Road. It was like the apocalypse, especially there. And I was working all the time, so I'm not being able to be when I like to be present. And I felt bad, and there was a guilt that came with that of like, we have to provide, I have to bring in money in order to sustain this thing, and it's like she's alone and she does, you know, not being able to leave the house. It was crazy, man. I don't even know how to describe it. It was a really crazy time. And men, I will say, don't get any credit for having to deal with postpartum, because it's an insanity that is very real. And, you know, you're going through the change of having a kid. Like I'm 56 now, but I'm 50 years old and 52 years old. And I'm like, whoa, we're doing it. So my whole adult life will be raising children. I will get out of high school. I will have a year to myself, 2 years to myself. And then I will be raising kids my whole life. My youngest I'll be 70 when my youngest graduates high school. You know what I mean? So there's that daunting factor. And then you're dealing with a different personality. That's now, I got my girl back, but.
In going through that period together makes the relationship stronger. How?
For obvious reasons. I mean, I think it's like, when you're committed.
I mean, it could have been what broke you guys, right?
No.
I mean, it wasn't for you, but it
could have broken anybody.
Right.
But not in our mindset. You know, and anything can happen. I'm not an idiot. Anything can happen. That's one thing that I always hold true, is like, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. But right now.
Approaching the 8-year anniversary.
The 8-year anniversary of us, very soon. And I have a surprise.
Oh, wait, can you tell us?
No.
I mean, this isn't going to air till after.
I'm going to go do something with her that will be fun. It'll be fun. It'll be really fun. Yeah, but no, there's something about the mentality. I'll just finish by saying this. There's something about being truly committed. And it's like, you know, this idea of like, not based on it, but through thick and thin, through rich and poor. It's like, I want to experience the rest of my life with this person because I trust this person. And the trust didn't come from that person, partially, but the trust came from a shift in my own perspective of like, I know shit can happen. We're all human, we all up, but I like being around this person.
Was there a moment that caused that perspective shift?
Getting sober.
Getting sober. Well, so she brought up her own sobriety and said, she said 2 weeks after you got sober, she made the decision to do it herself. Lasted 7 years. She's like, then I took a break, and now I'm approaching the 2-year anniversary. Doing that with somebody impacted you how?
It didn't necessarily. I was very happy that I wasn't with somebody who was constantly wanting to go to a bar. I probably wouldn't have fared very well because I was very committed to that sobriety.
And she said the scariest part for her was the fact that the entirety of your guys' relationship up to that point, or like some of the most fun moments had been always partying, and how you figure out how to enjoy life together.
How do you know if you even like this person without that? You know, I mean, that was hard partying, and then you're in this place, by the way, and you're like, what do we do now? We go take a bike ride. We're gonna go swim in the ocean. You want to go take a walk. You know, it depends on how you present it. And my whole thing, I've said this before, but my whole thing is my job is to make sobriety more fun than my greatest romance of what drinking used to be. That's what I didn't understand before. I loved to drink, man. I loved it. And it was like gasoline to me. It was like fuel.
You said it was a hit of adrenaline.
Yeah, man. I mean, I wasn't one of those people that like sipped it watching TV. You know, I've been 86th out of Main Street, every single bar on Main Street. Like, that's it, you're out. I still know those managers. They're like, hey, stoked that you're sober, because you're not allowed back in. And that's that thing that comes out. It's like that Jekyll Hyde thing. It's like, I'm a decent human being, and then I have a drink, and I don't know what's going to happen. I could be a ton of fun. There's a ton of people you could talk to. It was like, I had the greatest night with Josh. Oh my God, we rappelled off the tallest building and whatever. And then other people are like, awful. Like, dude just blinked and changed. That doesn't happen anymore. And I'm so happy it doesn't happen anymore, regardless of how anybody feels about it. I don't care. So I think that thing that you're talking about, that, you know, with Kathryn, I think what Kathryn saw when I got sober, and not that this is all about sobriety, but when I got sober that was first. I was willing to lose her. I was willing to lose anything. I was willing to lose it all to make that the priority. And then I could build on that, and I did. And I met this girl named Kathryn, who turned out to be an amazing human being that I love sharing my life with.
What was it about I think it was the morning after Halloween?
That's when I woke up on that sidewalk?
Right.
Yeah, right there. I couldn't figure out how to get in here because I had like wet brain or something. Yeah. I remember Roger Deakins used to run by. Several times I woke up on the sidewalk. Roger Deakins lives close by, and he would run down to the beach, and he would not even acknowledge, you know? I'd be like, waking up. He'd kind of give a wave. I think he would do it like a sidewalk. Totally humiliating. So yeah, it was Halloween night. 2013, 14. It's one of them. And I woke up November 1st, and I didn't know where my truck was, and there was some very minor hit and run at the Del Taco up on Lincoln that I escaped from. And yeah, it was typical. It wasn't out of the ordinary. There was nothing out of the ordinary about it. It wasn't like I had hit this place, that I hit bottom, and it was just it was what I used to call a Tuesday. It's just another day. And that became super boring all of a sudden. That became like, I hit that fork. And I said, do I want to be that? Because I know I can be this for the rest of your life. And that's what it is. I know it super well. Or you can try to find a different version of this circus. It's all a circus. But this is, maybe I can stop putting my head in the lion's mouth. Maybe I can do some trapeze with a net under me.
Has that helped, like therapy?
Therapy, I would say, you know, because I've done so many things, and it was more based on like, I don't want there to be an experience that I haven't had. I know that there's no way to assuage that, but I want to get as close as I can to having all the experiences, especially if I'm afraid of them. You know, if I jump out of a plane, what if the chute doesn't open? I don't know. Let's just jump and find out. And it's that kind of thing, whether it's psychically or emotionally or physically or whatever it is. And I think that I'm trying to get back on track. I have a tendency to meander.
Well, I asked, you brought up like kind of passively therapy.
The therapeutic thing is that I've learned a lot. I learned a lot. There was a place I went to called the Hoffman Institute when I got sober, and they didn't take non-sober people. It wasn't based on sobriety. It was based on something else. But a friend of mine who I had known before, who I knew to be a complete like one of the worst I ever met, had gone to this place and was a different human being. And a friend of mine, a mutual friend, said, you should talk to him. I said, I don't want to talk to that asshole. And I did end up calling him, and he was different. And he's one of my closer friends now. And he said, yeah, you should try this place. And I went to this place, and one of the things that they did was there was a cemetery close by, and they said, go down to this grave, lay on a grave, and imagine your closest friends, your family and your closest friends and all the people that love you end up at this funeral. But they're pissed. They're pissed because how you manipulated them, that you died young and they loved you, and that you really, you know what I mean, really raked them over the coals, and they're angry about it. So I did it, and then I went up and I told this counselor what I did, and she said, no, you didn't do it right. I said, I had this amazing epiphany. And she said, no, it wasn't right, do it again. And I did it again. And I went back up and I told her, and she said, no, do it again. And then I remember I walked out into the driveway and I was like, F this place. Like, I know what they're doing. They're trying to break me. They're trying to this is what they all do. And I said, if I leave, I had that moment where I go, if I leave, I know what leaving is. But what if I stay? What if I jump out of the plane? And I stayed, and I went down there, and I laid on that grave, and I imagined everybody. It was a visual that I will never forget. And then I experienced it, and I went back up to this counselor, and I didn't even get a word out. I went, and she goes, you got it. And I thought that was really, and again, I'm somebody who, at least from an objective point of view, I would perceive myself as being somebody who would be like, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
Which is the whole reason why I do it.
And doing that helped how?
It helped me realize that I carry some responsibility, not just for myself, but for those that love me, and that it starts with me and starts with my own relationship with myself and how I carry myself and how honest I am with myself. And I've seen from that moment on the massive impact that that's had.
Really?
Massive, massive. The biggest one being my older kids. I didn't know that my older kids didn't trust me. I didn't know that. And I didn't ask for them to trust me, and I didn't do that thing that, you know, especially whether you do therapy or whether you get sober, whatever it is, about like, see all I've done? I mean, come on, like, what more do you want from me? That kind of thing, which is horrible, I think. And I didn't look for any of that. I just was focused on the change, you know, and shifting a perspective and kind of, and then I remember it was about 4 years into it, 4.5 years into it, I just remember seeing in both kids' eyes something changed. Like, oh, we can rely on this dude. We love this guy. We've always loved this guy. We've always appreciated this guy, but he's kind of, you know, he's a Cito Rat through and through. And you can't trust somebody like that. You can't rely on somebody like that.
And what do you think it was that changed during those 4 years?
I really enjoyed the circus now, that I really enjoy the heart in it and searching for that heart in it, searching for the nucleus, the nectar, as my friend calls it, my buddy Brett. You know, he'll say now, just write me a text, and he'll be like, how you doing? And I'll say something. He'll be like, you're living in the nectar, man. You're living in the nectar. I like that.
How are you a different father now?
I'm just more responsible, you know? I think I was a good dad. I was always a good dad. I was always a good dad. I always loved being a dad. There was never a time where I didn't love being a dad. It was always my priority. From the time that Trevor was born, it was always the number one thing for me. So, you know, I mean, you know, Debbie and I decided to have, both kids were born out of wedlock. So, you know what I mean? And Debbie and I decided to have another kid as we were going on the A train in Manhattan to go to 2 different dates. That's when we decided to have another kid. And we were together one time. And then I had quit acting. I was going to France to study at the University of Tours below Paris. I was a major, I was a Francophile. And I was doing a happy face. We always used to theme our trips. I was going from Nantes down through the Pyrenees and up to Dijon with my son, my 4-year-old son, who I would bungee cord to my backpack so when he fell asleep, he wouldn't fall off. And we were hitchhiking, taking trains, walking. And it was during that trip that Debbie called me and said, by the way, guess what? So I said, well, I guess I'm not going to tour at university, and I'll come home, and we did that. We ended up having Eden. So when I see Eden at the ranch, at her wedding, talking about she's never known her parents to be together, but she couldn't imagine having better parents. It means something.
You, I think, not too long ago, discovered Super 8 reels of your mom as a kid. I know you have a voicemail from her on a phone in storage as well. But what is it about looking at your kids that you see your mom?
Oh, they're spice. All my kids have spice. All my kids are a spicy Mexican dish. You know what I mean? They all have gumption. They all have fire. And yeah, I see my mom in that. That my 5-year-old right now, I mean, I was talking to my wife about it before I left this morning. I was like, she's got directly in your pupils. She'll look you right in your pupils and she goes, no. And you just go, ah. And she's got extra fire. Her fire's hot. So it scares me a little bit, but at the same time, it doesn't. Because you don't know how that, depending on us, then I take a lot of responsibility. There's the nature-nurture thing. But when I go back and I see those teachers that, paid attention and were present, and when I, certain people that I've met throughout my life, Anthony Zerbe or whatever, when you put the care into something, Tony Hopkins said it. He was like,
Josh, I'm gonna move just this out of frame.
yeah, Tony Hopkins said to me one day, how great is it that we're like this? And I was like what? And he was like, we have this program and we're edgy and we're angry. And I was like, what? Is that good? Is that like a good thing? And he was like, yeah. Because left to its own devices, who we are can be the most destructive, hurtful thing imaginable. But given a few tools and directed in the right way, we can be the most productive, progressive, trustworthy people imaginable. And I was just like, it changed everything for me when he said that.
You have amazing stories in the book that give context to just how much fun you had over the years. Fun. But you started, I think, smoking at 9. 8. Done all sorts of drugs, including heroin. How do you get yourself to stop that?
Stop the what? The cigarettes or the heroin?
Heroin.
I was never fully committed. I mean, I remember all my junkie friends would be like, why don't you just do it? But I was always starting and stopping. Something in me, that was that part of me. Heroin was a finality. It represented a finality, an arrival.
Meaning
in people.
What?
Meaning you're truly addicted, man. You are addicted. Like you are physically addicted. So that was that thing that I always had in me, that always had his toe somewhere else, that was like, yeah, but what is there? Right? Is there literature? Is there other types of people? Is there other types of experiences? So, I think a normal strung out junkie would say, oh, he just played with it. Even though I got strung out a couple of times, it wasn't for long.
How about your worst trip ever that comes to mind?
Worst trip? Well, that's, it. It's in the book. Was the first time I ever took LSD, I was 13, on Feather Hill Road in Santa Barbara. And then that night I took it again. So I had a 12-hour trip. And then that night somebody had the bright idea of saying, let's do it again. And then everybody went, yeah. And Jason Sears was there, and Mike Herbert, and a lot of these other guys. Anyway, we ended up at Herb's house, we ended up calling the Herb Estate. And and I ended up there alone, naked, on the floor, with Herb's mom throwing up in the kitchen. That's what I remember. And I didn't know if I was creating it, my brain, because it was pretty powerful stuff. So I went from a heaven of sorts, an epiphanous heaven, having the greatest experience, to truly the most hellish experience imaginable.
You didn't give context to this one story, so that's the only reason I'm asking.
Yeah.
The frozen fish in someone's rectum.
How do you know that? How do you know that? I didn't write about that. How do you know that?
We found out about it.
You did?
Somewhere.
This is like research about the frozen fish in some dude's ass? Amazing. Kudos. Good for you. Yay. Go, Graham. Your show's going to be huge. Yeah, Mike Herbert did that. I'll call him out. Mike Herbert. Who was it who OD'd? I don't remember. But Mike, I don't know if it was it definitely wasn't a minnow. It was a bigger fish. What kind of fish was it? I don't remember. But anyway, Herb took it out of the thing, and the guy didn't die. That's the point. He had an awakening. Maybe two, but he definitely had one.
Well, that's what
Poor dude.
we just didn't understand.
That's what you got to understand. Look at him, I'm sweating now.
We just didn't understand the relevancy of that to saving the guy. So.
That's what you have to, like, every day was that, man. It makes me laugh, it makes me cry, it makes me, because it's insanity. That's the insanity. But was it fun?
Do you miss it?
No. I love that I have it, though. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But it's mine.
Costa Rica.
Yeah, I remember it. Now we're on to the stabbing. F***ing A, dude.
Well, so it was...
You're going to hell, by the way.
Oh, come on. So it was...
I have a relationship with God now. Go ahead, try to ask your question.
Kathryn... she brought up her most vivid memory from that moment is listening to you on the phone.
After I'd been stabbed?
With your kid's mother.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Debbie. Yeah, she was cool. She was so mellow. It was like, Debbie has known me long enough, almost my whole adult life, that she didn't play into my drama, which was amazing to me. I mean, that was incredible.
And was it drama, though?
Huh?
Was it drama? I mean, you legitimately think you're dying in that movie.
Yeah, but did I really? You know? I was still walking. I was still all right. The truth of the matter is, being stabbed with what I was stabbed with in the way that I was stabbed, which was a straight arm death blow, I should have died right away. It missed my aortic artery, which comes down and splits, I think. It missed by like 2 millimeters or less. And I would have been passed out in, 45 seconds, 30 seconds, and I would have been dead in 2.5 minutes. But it didn't. That wasn't what was in store for me, and I believe in all that stuff, Why? Why my belly button? The toughest, ligament in your entire body, slowed it down enough where, So, yeah, and I was talking to Deb on the ambulance ride on the way to the hospital. And I was like, if I don't make it, tell the kid. She goes, yeah, I know what to do. And I was like, yeah, but seriously. She's like, I know. She said, you're going to be fine. I know what to do. You're going to be fine. I was like, how do you know that? She's like, I don't mean this in some romantic, pompous way, but people like you don't die, It's kind of how it felt.
I just want to throw out some moments and get what comes to mind on your end or what you recall from the interaction. The first one being the lunch with Warren Beatty.
Yeah, the lunch with Warren Beatty was great because because there was no reason for it. He asked me to lunch, and I was like, yeah, obviously he's got a project, and he's doing a project. He doesn't work very often. When he does do a project, he, you know. I'd met him maybe once before through Sean, and yeah, about 2 hours into the lunch, it was like one of his places that he goes to, and 2 hours into the lunch, I said, so what's the deal? Like, what are we doing? He's like, what do you mean? I go, well, why'd you ask me to lunch? He goes, because I want to talk to you. I go, about what? He goes, about whatever. What? You know, that a personal thing, you know? And he said, it was just me wanted to talk to you. It's just interested in talking to you. And then there was something during that lunch where he said, have you ever directed before? And I said, no. And he said, you're a director. You should be directing. I was like, huh. And that was one of the reasons why I started directing.
Your mom and Clint Eastwood were friends. Mm-hmm. How about the best time you've ever had with Clint?
I think when there were a couple of times, it didn't happen often, but Kyle and Allison, I knew when my mom would, you know, maybe we'd travel with them or something. And I remember ice skating. And then one time I saw him years ago. I saw him at a function, and I said, hey, Clint. And he said, hey, James. Or, hey, Jim. And he thought he was I thought he was, you know what I mean? He had like a flashback moment. And I was like, wow, that was crazy. That was weird. Yeah.
You were runner-up to Johnny Depp in the 21 Jump Street series back in the day. How about the most memorable time you ever had hanging out with Johnny?
Probably because I did an episode of that later. Mm-hmm. I ended up doing like the third episode, and he was going, because we were in his apartment. He had just finished Platoon, and we were in his apartment after we had read for that. He was driving his girlfriend's white convertible VW Rabbit, and we went to his apartment, and we waited for that phone call. And he was showing me the stuff that he had brought back from wherever Platoon was filmed, talking about Oliver Stone and this amazing experience that he had had over there working on this film. And then he got the call, because that producer really fought for him. The network wanted me, the producer wanted him. And then he stuffed a bunch of in his bag, and then he took off, and that was it. And he made it his own, obviously. He hated it. And he made it his own. If you look at the trajectory of that thing, but I did like the third episode, and yeah, we would go out a lot at night. We were two fairly big drinkers at that time, and you know, it was like what we were portraying on that series couldn't have been more opposite of who we were.
Speaking of Oliver Stone, the 2010 dinner you had with Oliver Stone and Donald Trump. Yeah,
at the 21 Club. That's where I met Donald Trump. That's where I became friends with Donald Trump. No longer, but yeah, it was me, Shia, Donald, Melania, and Oliver. That's quite a gathering.
Outside of him lending you $20, what stands out from the night?
You know, there's a weird thing that happened, man. So we're in his apartment, and he's telling us where he was standing when he watched the towers go down. And it was a very kind of emotional, and he was emotional about it. He was like, we didn't know what was happening and this and that, and we looked that way, and this is what we saw. And I've always been super into architecture, just absolutely obsessed. My son actually went to jail in San Francisco once because he, just unknowingly walked on somebody's property, fascinated by the architecture because it was a build, because I had taken him in hundreds of houses myself. So he didn't know it was against the law. And he got busted for it. You know what I mean? I was like, that was my fault. That was totally my fault. But so I was in his house, and I was like, architecture and this, and I was interested in what he had done as a guy who came into Manhattan and built a hotel in the middle of a cesspool, basically, and it became successful. It's like, what made you do that? You know what I mean? So he's showing me around his apartment, and then then we stopped and started talking, and it was me, Shia, the two of them, and Oliver, and I said, can I see upstairs? I said, what's upstairs? He said, our bedroom. And I said, can I see upstairs? He said, yeah. And then nobody moved. And I said, cool, so should we go up? And he said, yeah. And then he still didn't move. And I'm thinking, what the is happening? Like, it's literally, we're in the Twilight Zone now. And then there was silence. And I looked at Oliver. I'm like this. I looked at Shai. He didn't know what was going on. I said, so should we go up? I said it a third time. So should we go upstairs? He goes, sure. And he didn't move. And then there was silence. And I said, well, thanks for having us here. I really appreciate it. He goes, yeah, no problem. And he shook his hand and all that. It was the weirdest moment. I still get wigged out by it. I don't know what was happening. I still don't to this day. It's like he couldn't not say no, but he wasn't going to get out of the way of the thing. It meant no, but he said yes.
I want to run through a few of your notable parts. You're on the set of American Gangster, and you forget your line, and you put your hand on Denzel's shoulder.
Oh, yeah. Denzel and I, by the way, get along very well now. I saw him, anyway. Yeah, we almost got into a fight. There was a moment where, Brian Grazer was going around with his hair standing straight up, and I had done some scenes with
I
Russell.
love Brian, by the way.
Brian's the best, man. And he was like, Josh and Russell are amazing. Josh and Russell are amazing. I'm sure Denzel got wind of that. When I would see Denzel, I don't know, in character, I don't know. I'm just here. I'm like, I can't even believe that I'm here with this cast. Like some of my favorite actors. The Insider's one of my favorite all-time movies. So I get through moments with Russell and then Denzel. And Denzel showed up. He was a little late to set, and there was a whole thing there. And then he showed me the lines, and he said, he didn't change any of my lines, but he kind of changed the structure of it. He said, I think I'm going to put this down here and I'll put that up there. But he wouldn't really look at me. And then, so I was trying to remember the structure. And then we rehearsed. It wasn't that many lines, mostly mine. And I'm supposed to be super confident. It's Denzel Washington, man. It's like not easy. You're just this actor who they're trying out, seeing if he's the real thing or not. And I forgot a line. And I put my hand on his shoulder. And I said, what's the line? And he hit my hand off. And he said, don't ever put your hand on me. And I was like, holy shit, I'm going to scrap with Denzel Washington. This is crazy. We're not actors anymore. We're not, at least in my mind. In his mind, he was just doing his job. He was that guy. He was Frank Lucas, period. But I didn't know. Whoa. And then we got through that moment. I said, are you okay? And he said, yeah. You? I said, yeah. Can I get my line? I said, go for it. It's like he'd said what he needed to say. And then I saw him, like maybe a year later at something, and he saw me and he goes, Josh. I was like, oh. I've heard that story now. Not that particular story. I've heard that story about Robert Duvall, who I've known for a long time, and it's this. I've heard that story on set from a lot of different actors now. That's just, I get it too now. It's like, how do you stay? If somebody's coming up to you and seeing Denzel Washington or seeing Robert Duvall, and you're an actor who's just kind of starting out, you just want to have an experience with that person. Let's talk. Like, yeah, I sat down with Denzel Washington, I had a conversation, and he talked about, cry freedom, or he talked about glory, or talked about, you want to have an experience. And those guys are just trying to do their job. So it makes sense to me that they would kind of narrow outside life into in any way that they can.
And yet for you, between action and cut is not your favorite time.
It hasn't been, but there's something recently that I did. I just did Knives Out with Rian Johnson and Daniel Craig and all these people that I really, Andrew Scott and Kerry Washington and people who I really look up to a lot. Glenn Close again, who I adore. And it was a really good opportunity to kind of sink into a role. I mean, it's supremely written, this priest, and it's yeah. So I was like, I want to do this because I want to go further with it. I feel, again, after 40 years, I still have that mentality where I'll take out an acting book and start reading through it and saying, it's like a F1 racer going back to kart racing and saying, what's the S, where's the nectar? Where's the nectar again? And I think with that movie, it was, yeah, I actually had some positive experience between action and cut.
Paul Haggis and Crash.
Oh yeah, that was really fun. I loved working with Paul on that. What a dandy. No, I didn't end up doing that. I write about it, and it was, listen, man, again, the perspective later on is, I get it now. Producing, directing, acting, being on all sides of it now. But I thought it was a little crude. You know, I'm doing a play, I'm doing Exonerated on Bleecker Street, and I'm talking to him on the phone before I go in and do the play, and he was like, I was the first person to read Crash, and he was like, yeah, I can't use you in Crash because you have no value, like none. And so, hey, do you think Diane would be interested? Can you get her the script? I mean, it all came in the same sentence. And I was like, I felt that big. And I went in and I did, you know, I was doing what I was doing, which is part of, you know, this profession in this day and age, when you see people come up, when you experience people come up and say, I want to be an actor, 9 times out of 10, they want to know how to be famous. Whereas back in the day, it was about paying your dues and about the kind of work that you were doing and what you were reading, and if you were getting people together in weekends and reading through just random plays in the weekends, and you just wanted to get further into it. I think Jerry Seinfeld talked about it recently, where it was like, it wasn't always about money. It changed. Back in the 70s, you were just in the back of the comedy club or whatever, and you wouldn't talk about money. Talk about your set, or you talk about your experience, or you talk about your trials and tribulations of becoming a better comic. And I found the same thing now. It's like, it's less and less do you find actors who just want to like get in the soup, get in the cauldron together and just...
What?
I don't know. I think just social media. I think this idea of a perception that I said in the beginning, which is celebrities do one thing. They walk down a perpetual red carpet and they wave at people, and people clap for them. When the truth of the matter is like even mentioning Denzel, and I look back at the work that Denzel's done, and I'm absolutely flabbergasted. When he has that tear come down in Glory, or when he's, you know, Cry Freedom is another great, there's just so many great movies that I look at him, you know, and I'm just in awe, in absolute awe. How do you do that? You see Daniel Day-Lewis, how do you do that? That's a different version of it, though. When you're transported by story, truly transported, I don't have to live in this reality at all times. And there's other realities that I can live in that are going to mirror my reality and give me a different perspective. That's interesting to me. That's better than taking LSD to me. Because that's my only goal, is to find out how I can be perpetually tripping and not have to deal with jail.
No Country for Old Men. How you got the audition and then Quentin Tarantino all of a sudden directing you?
Yeah, man, I auditioned for it. Sam Shepard told me about the book, and I went out the next day and I bought the book in Austin, Texas, and I read the book in a day.
And your agents say you have no shot at
They don't even say no shot. They wouldn't dare say that. You know what I mean? They just say, oh yeah, there's that. And I go, great, so can we audition for it? And they're like, yeah, put yourself on tape. I mean, that's the best you can do. There's no interest, though. There's no pre-interest.
Right.
So I asked Robert, who was always carrying around kind of like a camcorder. I said, would you do me a favor? I'll do this with Marley Shelton, and who I was working with at the time, and can you just film it? He said, why don't we just use the camera that we have, Genesis camera, $1 million camera. And then Quentin got word of it, and he was there, and he started directing me. Why don't you say it this way? Why don't you say it that way? Whatever. But it was a super, I mean, I've told the story a million times, but it was a super well done audition. Back when you didn't do that, by the way, you didn't send in auditions. Like, you were there in person or you weren't there. Mm-hmm. So when the Coens got it, their response was, who lit it? And they'll say that. They'll tell you the story. I mean, they had no interest in the actor. And I've seen that audition recently, and I was like, that's not that far from what I did. So what were they not seeing? But they needed to experience me in the room. And my agent got Ethan's number and begged him to take their last audition, and they were focused on somebody else who I saw in the hallway as I had my head down and just focused on the 6 scenes that I had gotten hours before. And I went in to audition for them, and I ended up getting it that day.
The one piece I haven't heard you speak as much about was your reaction when you got word that you got the part.
I don't react when great, like that's a great thing. It's a great, the prospect of it is amazing. I get super mellow. It's like I'm good in really stressful situations because I get super calm. And I got super calm. You know what I mean? And then 2 weeks later, I hit a car, my motorcycle, and I snapped my collarbone.
And how do you convince your
You
doctor
lie.
to lie
You intimidate.
for you? So, take me into that conversation and what was discussed.
I just said, it wasn't even an intimidation. He said, look, I said, Ethan wants to talk to you. Like, what do you think you're going to tell him? It was like, well, you know, that it was a clean break and that you'll probably heal and it'll take about a 3-month heal, but you'll be, you know, whatever, he said. And I said, yeah. I don't think we can quite say it like that. I think we need to kind of get more into like it's maybe a hairline fracture or something. I don't know what he ended up saying, but.
And he was on board.
He was on board. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. He wasn't untruthful. He just left out some things.
But he understood how big of a deal this was for you.
Yeah,
And
really the only reason, like I've said this, but the only reason is Llewellyn gets shot in the right shoulder, and it's the only reason why it works, because you can tell that something's going on. Mm-hmm. You can tell when I'm shooting the antelope that I'm picking up the thing like this, and I'm holding my collarbone in place, because it was a clean break. It was still moving. And then when it started to calcify and all that, you know, I couldn't do the jump, which Mark Norby ended up doing. There was a jump when I'm running toward the river. Llewellyn's running toward the river, and I didn't get shot or something, but no, he doesn't get shot, but he somersaults down the side of the hill. And we were waiting for me to do that till the end because my collarbone had to heal well enough to be able to do that.
What got to you more with W, the Bell's palsy, or the fact that his kind of lingo ended up permeating, you know, everyday life for you for a long period of time?
What, whose lingo?
Bush's.
The America thing?
Yeah.
I mean...
Can you do that once more?
No. At some point. I was so terrified of that. You know, I probably shouldn't say this, but Sebastian Stan just did Trump, and it looks pretty good, you know. And he called me at some point, and he was like, "What do you think of this?" Because it's so in the consciousness of every day that's what was going on with Bush at that time, with W. He was on CNN every 5 minutes.
Right.
So it was like, do we need to be worried and this and that? And it wasn't a hammering. It was more of a, which I kind of brought up to Oliver, because there was one script that was really hammering, an early script. And I was like, this is not interesting to me, because you watch CNN and you get this same thing. Like, why don't we like get into who he was and how did this happen? Not even that it was wrong. It's just we have the feelings that we have about it looking back on it. But how did the guy was the total misfit when they were focused on the other son? And this guy became president of the United States. So that was interesting to me. But I was terrified doing it, because I'm like, am I going to get shot? Am I going to get this? Am I going to do some crazy whatever? And just doing it well, like staying in character, and so I stayed in character pretty much the whole time. I didn't go out once. And then when I finally did go out at the end of the thing, I went to jail. I mean, what the I just can't. It was like, You know, I can't just go out and have a good time. I have to go to jail.
All right, I want to wrap talking about sports a little bit. You were, I know you said you were bad at sports growing up, but as I understand it, you were quite the surfer. I mean,
I was an okay surfer.
You were finishing in like top place in competitions.
Yeah, but I was WSA and NSSA. I was taken around by Tommy Curran, who became one of the greatest surfers. He became the best surfer in the world, but even looking back, he's considered one of the greatest surfers that ever lived. And his mother used to take us to all the contests. Mm-hmm. And Tommy had found God at that point and like gotten sober or whatever and kind of like only focused on surfing, and it was just an anomaly to watch. But I love surfing. I still love surfing. I love the ocean. I love the sea. There's something about the sea emotionally that makes me, it's like the sea to me on, this sounds so lame, but the sea on earth to me reminds me of my mother in this world. It's emotional, it's super calm. I can always count that there's gonna be something going on. And I don't know why that's the case, and it just is. So I'm down at the water every day that I can be,
Which is how often?
At least a couple of times a day right now, at least. I mean, I got in the ocean the other night. It was cold, but I don't care. I need to be saturated in that.
You race cars
I was
number of
better
times
at
before? So you and your dad were both champions of the Toyota Pro Celebrity Race.
Yeah, which is fun. I mean, that's a fun fact. He was a good driver. He was a very different driver than I was. I was a much more aggressive driver, of course. He was a guy who kind of figured people out and he'd just hang back, and then he'd pass everybody like the last 2 laps, whereas I was more aggressive. But yeah, I was talking with Paul Gentilossi on Rocket Sports and driving the Trans Am circuit.
Oh, like real deal.
Yeah, I was gonna like, in my mind, if that was a viable profession for me, I would have probably quit acting at that point. I wasn't working a lot. I wasn't working on things that really moved me. So yeah.
And what happened?
I started working.
Okay.
And Paul was like, I can't kill this guy who everybody's kind of looking up to now, all of a sudden.
The number of speeding tickets you've gotten in your life is what?
I've never gotten a speeding ticket. That's not true. I did As You Like It at the International Librero Theater, which was quite good. I have gotten, early on, I got a ton of speeding tickets. I was always on the verge of getting my license taken away for many, 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 many years. And I haven't gotten a speeding ticket for a long time now. A long time. But I ride with a bunch of guys. I ride choppers with a bunch of guys. Like, I'm gonna leave here. I'm gonna go to my buddy Toby Morse's house. I'm gonna do a little workout. And Toby's the lead singer of H2O, and then I'll go from there to my buddy Brian's house. And then tomorrow we leave to our chopper event at Pappy and Harriet.
No, I know. We're really excited to go with you.
You're not gonna go. You're not gonna show up, are you?
We.
Oh my God, he looks terrified. He's like, no.
What do you enjoy about biking?
Everything. Everything. It terrifies me. People out there terrify me, the way they drive, looking at their phones, all that kind of stuff. So if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it with a really loud group with really old bikes that have no buffers on them, and we're there. But I go back to this place. My wife said it recently. She was like, I went to London and I was working in London, and then I came back and we moved, and I was into the kids and the first day of school and school period and all, you get caught up in that. And she was like, you need to go ride. And I was like, because I had a little meltdown one night and I was like, where are all my friends? Like, we moved, I don't have any friends anymore. And she was like, go ride, go ride, go ride. And I did, and it just righted everything. There's something about being on a bike, on an old bike.
And you have some cool ones.
I mean, I got a 37 knucklehead, I have a 56 panhead, I have a 68 shovelhead, and a 47 knucklehead. And the 37 knucklehead is like my tank. It just doesn't break. It just doesn't. And we're on the side of the road a lot, fixing each other's bikes and all that. But yeah, there's just something, the rumble, the wind in your hair, very tough to describe. I've tried to do it in the book. It took me a long time because it's just this visceral thing that takes over. And it's just, the world is good.
Describe feeling your mom's presence out there.
On the bike?
Uh-huh.
Which happens. I mean, I wrote in the story, it just went back and forth. That's when I found the story, because I was on a run to Virginia City, Nevada for the Choppers Magazine event there. And I was I was getting stung by bees, and we're going through Mojave Desert, and it feels like it's 180 degrees out, and you're totally sunburned, and you're begging God to not let your bike break down, because you're going to be out in the middle of nowhere and just scorch and just turn into a piece of ash. And suddenly my mom will, all the travels and all the time on the road that I spent with her, and all the conversations and all the laughs and all the stopping at, those gold mining towns that we would go to, and she'd give me a quarter and I could pull it on the slot machine when nobody was looking. And very colorful time. And it just reminded me, like, the adventure is everything, man. The adventure it's all in the adventure. That's the nectar.
Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, man.
Took a minute, but I'm glad we could do it now. I appreciate you making the time, and I'm excited also for the reception that you're going to get with the memoir.
We'll see. It's there to be received, and it will be received. Can I take those and frame them?
No, yeah.